you were drafted in the service, were you not?
That's correct. Yes, I was drafted.
How, at what age?
I'm
At
sorry.
what age?
I was 18,
18.
18 years old, yeah.
What thoughts went through your mind when you got drafted?
Well, I wondered what would happen to me later on down the road, you know.
Okay, so it sounds like a little bit like you're afraid of the unknown.
Yeah,
Understandable,
yeah.
certainly. And then you went through several places, as I understand, for your basic training?
Yes, after Fort Hays, Columbus, they sent me to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. And that was with the, I'm pretty sure it was the 277th Field Artillery. And our cadre was from Hawaii. They were there when they were bombed by the Japanese, and they were returned to the States to train troops.
And so you were scheduled to go to the Pacific Theater?
I was scheduled originally to go to the Pacific Theater, but after the Battle of the Bulge, they lost so many men there that they took us from California, Camp McCoy, or Camp San Luis Obispo, California, clear up to Massachusetts to POE.
If I recall correctly, you had a diversion on your route. It wasn't a straight train ride all the way from California to Massachusetts. Didn't you end up going someplace else first?
Yeah, we went by train, and it was like boxcar situation where they had bunks stacked up one upon the other, and it was very dusty and dirty, and very uncomfortable. And we were there aboard the train maybe 7, 10 days, and dry rations, sandwiches. That's about all we had. It was not a very pleasant trip.
But you made a stop someplace for a few days, didn't you?
Well, actually, we went all the way from California up to Massachusetts in one trip.
But I thought you told me that you had stopped to harvest wheat along the way.
Oh, well, this was earlier, yeah. After Camp McCoy, we went to Camp Funston, which was near Fort Riley, Kansas. And we were taking advanced training with the artillery where we were actually out on the field shooting the artillery guns, 105 howitzers. We had 4 of them in our battalion. And in the midst of that, we got a call from the government to go to North Dakota to harvest wheat. What happened was the men up there had all been drafted, so they had no help to harvest the wheat. So they sent our battalion up there to harvest wheat. And what would happen is 4 or 5 of us would go out to the farmer's house, and then they would take us out to the fields to actually shock up the wheat so that it wouldn't rot on the ground. And then later on, they brought the harvesting machines in and would harvest the wheat right out on the field. So that was quite a different experience being in the Army. But boy, I'll tell you, those most of those people up there were Norwegian, and boy, could they cook. I think I put on about 10 pounds up there.
Well, after you made it to Massachusetts, how did you get over to Europe? I'm assuming you went over by boat to England?
Actually, yes, that's correct. And I was telling my daughter this morning about that we went over there on the USS Lejeune, which was a captured German ship. It was a luxury liner in civilian time, but United States captured that ship and made it into a troop ship. And so that we went over on that ship. And I've got a picture of that too. And we landed in Le Havre, France. But before that, before we got to shore, the night before, we had to sleep with our life vests on. And I was down about 4 holds down in the ship. And during the night, they must have dropped depth bombs down for submarines, because we could feel the impact coming and hitting the sides of the ship, and you could hear the concussion. So I don't know how close we were to the submarines, but it was scary. I knew I'd never get out of there if it had ever hit the ship. So,
And once you landed in France, to what unit were you assigned?
well, I was with the 86th Division. I was in an anti-tank company, and we were stationed in France, for about, I guess, around 2 weeks. And I can remember the first night we left our camp, we were loaded on flatbed trucks with all our gear and everything. And as we got up towards the front, we could hear a machine gun firing. And I tell you what, I was really getting scared then. And when we stopped the truck, our sergeant come back and he says, there's a machine gun nest up above ahead of us, and we got to take that machine gun nest out. Said some of us might not come back. And man, I tell you what, I was so scared. I was trembling inside and everything. I hoping I could get through that. But luckily, somebody ahead must have got a hand grenade in there and took it out, or else they dispersed from there, because pretty soon the shooting stopped, and we were very relieved, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I can imagine it was pretty scary. The unit that you were in, was that General Patton's army?
Yes, we were assigned to the 3rd Army Group, and General Patton was the commander. And I remember when the French were liberated from the Germans, they had a big celebration, and we were asked to come in and take part in that. And I remember we were pulling our 57 millimeter gun behind our truck, and as we made the turn at the corner to go down the main drag there in France, in Paris, General Patton was standing on the corner, and as we went by, he was saluting us, and he had his pearl handle revolvers on, and he had riding breeches, and he had his helmet with his stars on. I was surprised, and I mean, he had a different uniform than any of the rest of us, but that was General Patton. And then we went down through the main street there in Paris. I could see the big arch. We went underneath, and I could see the Eiffel Tower. And the people were just exhilarated with joy, you know, because they were liberated from the Germans.
Did you actually see combat
Oh, yes.
along the way?
Several
Can you
times.
describe those situations for us, please?
Yes. In one occasion, we were coming down a slope, and there was houses on the one side of the road. And we got about, halfway down that slope, that hill, and all of a sudden, they ambushed us, actually, and they fired rockets at us. Maybe 500, I don't know, there was so many. And we were on the back of this truck and I jumped off into a ditch. I thought, if them rockets ever hit that truck, we would blow into pieces because was loaded with ammunition for the gun. It sounded like the end of the world to me. I was so scared. It's hard to explain it. But anyway, after I don't know how many rockets they fired at us, but there was numerous. And finally it quit. And then our convoy moved on down the hill. I don't know whatever happened to the rockets, whether they took them out or whether they just run out of ammunition or what, but it was very, very scary. And another time, we went into this small village, and our sergeant was trying to figure out where we were going to set up our gun. And about that time, we got airburst firing over our head, and shrapnel was coming down, and everybody hit the ground, and I could hear shrapnel whirling through the air as it was coming down. And I thought, oh my God, I hope I don't get hit. And next thing you know, I opened my eyes and there was a piece of the shrapnel that was about 8 inches long. Must have been the side of the shell. Come whirling down, and it was about 1 foot from my head, and it was still smoking. And I thought, oh my God, somebody must be looking after me. I really was scared there too, I'll tell you. And then we decided to go in this house it had a garage underneath the house, and we decided to go in there till things cooled down a little bit. And while we were in there, one of our comrades picked up a thing and was shaking it by his head. And the sergeant said, "Put that down." He says, "That's a German bazooka." Well, we had never seen a German bazooka, and he didn't know what it was. And here he was shaking that thing by his head. If that thing would have went off, it would have killed us all right in that garage.
Oh,
but luckily it didn't go off. I think about that too.
Did you say that you were in an anti-tank battalion?
Yes.
So did you ride in tanks, or did you ride in special armored vehicles that would take out tanks?
No. What we had was was like a cannon, and it was 57 millimeters, which was about a couple inches, 2 or 3 inches in diameter, the shell. But then the back part of the shell, where the explosives were, was maybe that big around. And it had a muzzle velocity the same as an M1 rifle. And when you fired that gun, it would jump in the air the wheels would jump off the ground about almost 2 feet. And it had 2 spades in the back of the trails, they called them. And then 2 guys would be on each trail, one here and one over there. And when it would fire, then we had to wait on there, and it would go down in the ground, plow down into the ground to hold it from coming back. And it was a very powerful gun, and we pulled it with like a 1.5 ton truck. It wasn't a big high truck like a dump truck or anything, but it was like a 1.5 tons, and that's what we used to pull that gun around. So that was our anti-tank. We would go out and road and set it up as a roadblock against tanks coming in. But I will say this, we were very, very lucky in that the Germans run out of fuel, and there wasn't too many tanks running, which probably saved our life too.
You're talking specifically the Battle of the Bulge.
I'm sorry.
Are you talking about the Battle of the Bulge?
No, I wasn't in on the Battle of
Oh, you weren't.
Bulge.
Oh, okay.
We went in there later, and that was one of the reasons we went from the Pacific Theater, or the training out there in California, back over to Massachusetts, was because the Battle of the Bulge, they lost so many men, and they took us from there and as to supply, new troops there.
I've heard that a lot of soldiers went out of their way not to make good friends because so many people were getting killed or seriously injured that they didn't want to go through the emotional trauma of losing one of their friends. What was your attitude?
Well, that's true what you're saying there. We stayed away from fraternizing with any of the people in Germany, and especially their troops. Um, I can recall an incident. It happened in Ingolstadt. It was we had a battle there, and that evening our sergeant had us set up a gun back it was like in a driveway, and it had a fence across the front, and we set up our gun right, aiming right down the main road. Well, that evening come, we had to pull guard duty. We'd be on 2 hours and then off 4. My buddy and I, and his name was Sherman B. Keck. What a great guy. Anyway, he and I were on watch that night. And pretty soon we heard a clunk, clunk, clunk. Looked up, and here's a prisoner, or a German, I should say, coming down the road. And we hollered, "Halt!" He kept walking, put his arms up over his head like that, so we knew he didn't have no gun. And he kept walking. And my buddy said, "What are we going to do, shoot him or what?" And I says, "As long as he's got his hands up," I says, "I don't think he's in any danger." So he walked right up in front of us. So we didn't know what to do with him, and we went to the sergeant and said, "We got this prisoner here, and what should we do with him?" He says, "Well, I'll watch guard while you're gone." He says, "March him up to the headquarters. It's right up this road here." So we motioned for him to go, and we kind of guided him with German commands and took him up to the headquarters. And we got up there, and we says, "We got a German prisoner for you." He said, "What did you bring him up here for?" He says, "You should have shot him down there." He says, "We'll have to take him out in the morning and shoot him." I said, "I don't know, we were just following orders." He said, "Okay, well, march him back in there." So we marched him back in detention area there, and then we went back to our unit. But I mean, we could have killed that man and took his life probably for nothing.
Now, you were in Germany, and I think you also said that you were in Austria.
Well, our outfit started at Cologne, Germany. We fired our 57 millimeter guns across the Rhine River. We set it up in the front yard of the house where we were staying. Incidentally, the house that we were staying in was a German doctor's house. When our regiment moved in there, they evacuated all the people in the neighborhood and told them they had to get out, and we took over their houses. And like I said, we set the cannon up in the front yard and fired over the Rhine River for the whole day. I couldn't hear for 2 weeks after that. My ears just rang and rang and rang. And if you spit on that gun barrel, it would sizzle. It was so hot from firing it. And so then the next day, now I think it was the next day, yeah, we loaded up, took with the gun and traveled down to a place called Remagen.
Yeah.
And then we crossed the Rhine River there at that bridge. The bridge had been partially destroyed, but there was still enough left there that we got across there before it collapsed or anything. And that's when we really first started into combat, was after we crossed the Rhine River.
Once you crossed the Rhine, I think that was the Ludendorff Railroad Bridge, if I'm not mistaken. Once you crossed that bridge, did you then go back up to Cologne?
No, we went from Cologne down to Remagen and crossed the bridge. That's the way it.
Oh, okay.
But while we were in Cologne, there was a big church there, and somehow that church was never bombed. It was still intact. It was amazing because all the other buildings were destroyed, but this church was still standing when we left there.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, the Germans put up a pretty good fight in Cologne, as I recall.
Yeah, they did. They put up a tremendous fight there, yes, because that was right before the river, Rhine River.
And there wasn't much left of Cologne other than that cathedral.
That's about it. Yeah, everything was destroyed. In fact, I wanted to tell you, when we first went into Germany, went through a city called Düren, there was nothing standing over 4 foot high because it had been bombed. And even trees, telephone poles, everything. There was nothing higher than 4 feet tall. And they took bulldozers to clear the streets so we could get through, so the troops could get through. When I was only 19 then, and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe this, There was so much destruction.
And then what happened after you moved?
War,
Well, yeah. What happened after your outfit moved into Austria?
Well, after the battle there in Ingolstadt, we went further on south, and as we went through a lot of these villages and stuff, we would come across people, and in one instance, I remember we went through this town and stopped, and pretty soon there were about 10 of them, about 10 people come out there, and they start hugging us, and we said, what's going on here? And they could speak a little English, and they says, well, we've been prisoners here in Germany. We're Polish people, and we've been slave labor, so to speak, here in Germany. And we're so happy that we're liberated now that we can go home. And they kissed and hugged us and brought out all kind of schnapps and stuff for us to drink. It was something else. I'll tell you, those people were so overjoyed because they were able to go back to their own homes. And
did you have the opportunity to interact with any of the German civilians?
Not really, but there's a story I'd like to tell. After the war ended, we were in Salzburg, Germany. Then we started to go back up towards the north, and we landed in Hamburg, Germany. I remember that, and they evacuated the whole street, and our companies and regiment took over the whole street. And I remember one evening we were having our chow, and we had a big pit dug about 6 by 6. It was right near the street, between the sidewalk and the street. There was a big pit dug about 6 foot deep, 6 foot wide, and then we would throw our garbage and stuff down in there, and it was full of coffee and water and stuff. And I see this German woman come up. She must have been 60 years old then. I was only about 19. And she had a little pan in her hand, and she crawled on her knees over to this pit and started scooping this here stuff out of the pit. And I thought, oh my God, that woman's starving, you know. There was no food for the Germans after the war. And that surely made a big impression on me, I'll tell you. See somebody that was so hungry for food, you know. I don't know how many days she'd gone without food, but boy, and she was scooping that stuff up and putting it in this pan so she could have something to eat.
Have you ever had the opportunity to go back to France or Germany or Austria?
I was back in Germany, well, it must have been in the 70s. My son had a kennel and raised dogs, and we went back over there. Germany had some of the best dogs in the world, and we went back over there, my wife and I, and bought some of the dogs and brought them back.
Did you visit any of the sites at which you had battles?
I never got into to any of the cities that we, but I made a fellow in our outfit made a list of all the towns that we went through in Germany, and I counted them one day, and there were 63 German towns and villages that we went through, and then there was 7 towns that we went through in France to get to the front lines. We were sent out on a problem, I guess you'd call it, and set up our cannon, our 57 millimeter, on a roadblock. And while we were moving the gun into position on this corner of these 2 roads, the one man, his name was Stokes, and he was a big guy. He was about 6'2" or 6'3" and weighed about 270, and he would ride the barrel of the gun to kind of balance it. That was his part of his job, and then the rest of us, 3 on each side of the trails, would position it into where we wanted the gun to set. Well, in the meantime, when we were rotating the gun around, the wheel on the cannon dropped down in this hole, and when it did, it throwed him off of the barrel. And he had been drinking all day, you know, there was so much German wine and stuff over there, and he'd been drinking a lot. And when he hit the hole, it throwed him off of the barrel, and he come up and he pulled out his .45 pistol, and he says, "I'll kill every one of you MFs for throwing me off the barrel." And I'm standing right next to him here, about 3 foot away, and I thought, oh man. I said, "Stokes, we didn't throw you off of that barrel." I said, "Look at that hole, the wheel went down in there. That's what throwed you off the hole." I said, "Put your gun away." He looked at me and gave me kind of a dirty look, but then he put his gun back in his holster. And the next day, the sergeant had him transferred out. Never seen him after that. I just thought I'd bring that up to show people that some of the things that happened while you're in combat.
You shared a lot of very interesting stories, sir. Are there any stories that you haven't told anyone, even your family, that you might want to share now?
I think I've covered just about everything that I can recall now.
Okay. After you got discharged, did you have a hard time readjusting to civilian life?
Not really. I guess I had a family by then. My wife had a child while I was overseas. In fact, I was at this airfield, Ansbach, when I got word that he was born, and he was 2 weeks old by the time the telegram got to me, and I'd been carrying cigars around to give out when he at his birth and that, and they were kind of ragged by the time I got to give them out. But we were at an airfield called Ansbach, and we bivouacked in their barracks. The Germans were the pilots in that. So that was kind of unique there.
You know, there are a lot of people in the younger generations, you know, kids born 20 years after the war ended, who really don't know much about World War II. I mean, is there anything you'd want to say to those generations? Anything?
The only thing I can say is I wish we could do away with war, because people that fight the wars are the ones that suffer, and they're not the ones that cause the wars. And it's a very unfair situation. But when you're called upon from your nation, you have to support your nation, because, I mean, that's your home life. And if that's taken away from you, then you don't have anything. So you have to defend your country.
Do you think you had any lingering medical or emotional effects, issues as a result of your experience in World War II?
Well, I'm sure when I first got home, I was kind of unsettled and didn't have my head about me, but after several years, things started leaving me and I became more stable, and I'm able to talk about it now.
How long did it take you before you were able to get comfortable with sharing those stories?
I don't know, I first started telling my daughter about it. I had to tell somebody about, what I lived through. So I started telling my daughter about things that happened. Some of the good and some of the bad.
You said you were in Germany. When you were there, did you have any lingering animosity towards the Germans, or did you look at them differently as...
Well, I tell you, I really thought the Germans people, they're good people. They were misled. And I remember talking to one person who could speak some English. And they told us that when Hitler first started, he got, because they were in a depression over there, and he got people back working, and they thought, oh, he's doing a good job. But then the next thing you know, he was transferring that into war stuff, which they thought, that's going to lead us into trouble. But at first they thought he was doing a good job because he was promoting work. And then later on, being a dictator and all, he maneuvered the thing around to conquering other countries around him. And they knew that they were in trouble then. Oh, yes. This one day we were in a convoy and we were coming up, it was kind of a grade, and we were coming up this hill in a convoy. And the next thing you know, we seen white flags go out the top windows of the houses there, which they were, saying they were surrendering. So as we got closer, they took the flags down, and then our convoy stopped. And we were there, I don't know, maybe another half hour. And pretty soon the flags went back up, the white flags went back up out of the windows. And then we proceeded on up to where the houses were. And then the convoy stopped. And I said to my friend, I said, you know, we haven't had any eggs for months. I says, I wonder if we could get some eggs from these villagers here. He says, boy, that's a good idea. But he says, we can't be gone very long or they'll pull out and we'll be AWL. I said, well, let's take a chance. So we run up to this house, knocked on the door. Woman come to the door and I says, Haben Sie Eier? And she says, do we have any eggs? In English. And that took me by surprise out here. Somebody's talking English. Here, come to find out, her and her husband were from Brooklyn, New York, and they'd been sent over there by their company, and then they got caught up in the war. And the Nazi party come around to their house and said, you either got to join the Nazi party or you're going to prison. He says, well, I'm not joining the Nazi party. So she says they hauled him off to prison. She hadn't seen him for 2 or 3 years. And she had a couple of little kids there too. And here she was from Brooklyn, and she even had that Brooklyn accent. So we talked there a few minutes, and we said, well, we got to go. So I don't know whatever happened after that to that woman, but she was very nice. She gave us eggs. So that was one of the humorous things, I guess, in my adventure over there.
After the war ended in Germany, my understanding is that you were not initially going to be sent directly back home.
Well, what happened is we eventually started moving up towards France. And I remember one day before, I got to tell this story, one day before we were loaded aboard ship, some of our people had to go out and work in the minefields, and I happened to be one of them. And we had a German prisoner assigned to us, and he was taking up these landmines. Some of them were about 12 inches in diameter. And they'd have to probe and find them and then uncover them, dig around them and uncover them. And they told us, if that prisoner escaped, then you're going to have to do his work. So nobody escaped, I'll tell you that. But I only had to do that one day, but I'll tell you what, I was thinking, here I got through the war and everything, now I'm out here in this minefield, I don't know if I'll ever get through it or what. But then after that, we were loaded aboard ships and come back to the United States for a 30-day furlough, since we were some of the last troops going into Germany. And since we had amphibious training out in California at Camp Pendleton, which was a Marine base, they had plans, which we didn't know, but they had plans for us for the invasion of Japan. We got a 30-day furlough, and then we reported to Camp Gruber, Oklahoma. We was only there maybe 4 or 5 days, and then we shipped to Fort Ord, California. And there we were combat loaded for the invasion of Japan. What happened is the war ended while we were still there in the harbor, and of course we thought, you know, we'd be escape any of that then since the war ended. And next thing you know, we were aboard ship and we headed for Philippine Islands, and the whole division was taken to the Philippine Islands for, I think maybe it was for backup, for occupation or something, but I was there maybe 5 or 6 months, and I finally had enough points where I could be discharged. And so I was glad to get away from the Philippines, I guess, and not have to go into Japan. So, to sum it up, I crossed both oceans with the 86th Division.